It all started on a stormy night. A billionaire stranded in the cold, a rugged mechanic who had long stopped believing in second chances, and a single moment that changed everything. When Isabel Harrington's car skidded off a rain-slicked road, she never imagined the man who would pull her from the wreckage would be someone like Liam Carter, a single father, a man of few words, and someone who had spent years building walls around his heart. She was used to power, control, and people who only saw her last name. He was a man who had lost too much to believe in anything beyond survival. They were never meant to meet, and yet fate had other plans. From quiet conversations over coffee to unspoken emotions lingering in the rain, their connection was undeniable. But some walls are built too high, and some pasts are too heavy to outrun. When heartbreak, fear, and duty pull them apart, one question remains. Will they be brave enough to fight for what they never expected to find? Or will their love become just another memory washed away by the rain? Get ready for an unforgettable journey of love, loss, and the choices that shape us. And if you love stories that grip your heart and leave you thinking long after the last page, subscribe to the channel, because this is just the beginning. Rain fell in relentless torrents, drumming against the windshield of Liam Carter's old pickup truck. The wipers struggled to clear the water fast enough, leaving streaks that blurred the already limited visibility. The road ahead was barely illuminated by the flickering glow of streetlights, their hazy reflections stretching across the slick pavement. Liam exhaled slowly, rolling his stiff shoulders. It had been a grueling day at the shop. His hands were sore from wrestling with rusted bolts, and his back ached from bending over engines for hours. But the exhaustion wasn't what weighed most heavily on him. Emma, his 10-year-old daughter, was waiting at home, likely curled up on their second-hand couch, watching cartoons with Mrs. Thompson, their elderly neighbor who always babysat when he worked late. He had promised he'd be home early tonight, promised they'd make hot cocoa and watch an old Disney movie together. He checked the clock on the dashboard, 9:47 p.m. Not too late, but later than he'd hoped. He pressed a little harder on the gas pedal, eager to close the distance between him and the warm glow of their small apartment. Then, headlights appeared up ahead, weaving erratically across the rain-slicked highway. Liam's pulse spiked as he instinctively eased off the gas. The sedan, an expensive one from the sleek silhouette, veered sharply to the left, then overcorrected, skidding sideways before spinning completely out of control. "Damn it," he muttered. The next few seconds unraveled in horrifying slow motion. The car careened across lanes before slamming nose first into the guardrail with a metallic crunch that echoed through the storm. Liam slammed his brakes, his truck skidding slightly as he yanked it onto the shoulder. The crash had sent up a spray of sparks, the vehicle now half crumpled against the barrier, its hazard lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. Without hesitation, he threw open his door and bolted toward the wreckage. The woman in the car. Rain soaked through Liam's flannel shirt within seconds, but he barely noticed. His boots splashed through puddles as he approached the twisted metal frame. Steam hissed from beneath the hood, and the faint, acrid smell of gasoline reached. His nose, his gut clenched. Not good. Peering through the fractured windshield, he saw her, a woman, slumped over the steering wheel, her dark hair partially covering her face. Even in the dim light, he could make out a deep gash along her forehead, crimson streaking down her temple, mingling with the rain. "Hey!" he called, rapping his knuckles against the shattered glass. "Can you hear me?" No response. He yanked. At the driver's side door, nothing. The impact had wedged it shut. Liam cursed under his breath. He needed to move fast. The front of the car was completely crumpled, and the faint hiss of leaking fuel made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Gritting his teeth, he planted one foot against the side of the car for leverage and heaved. The door groaned but didn't budge. "Come on," he muttered, adjusting his grip. A second, desperate pull, and the metal gave way with a screech. The door swung open just as a flicker of orange light danced beneath the hood. No time. Liam unbuckled her seatbelt, gently but swiftly pulling her from the wreckage. She was limp in his arms, her breathing shallow. A sharp spark crackled from the engine bay. Liam's instincts screamed at him. Run. Now. Seconds before the explosion, he hoisted her against his chest and ran. The moment his boots hit the wet pavement, a thunderous blast erupted behind him. The explosion's force pushed at his back, heat searing through his damp clothes. But he didn't stop, couldn't stop, until he reached his truck. He carefully lowered her onto the passenger seat, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. Her skin was cold, lips slightly parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. For the first time, Liam really looked at her. Even unconscious, there was an air of refinement about her. Her coat was expensive, tailored to fit. Delicate gold earrings glinted beneath the flickering overhead light. This wasn't just some stranded traveler caught in a storm. And yet, right now, none of that mattered. Right now, she was just a person who needed help. Liam exhaled sharply and pulled off his worn leather jacket, draping it over her shivering form. Then, without wasting another second, he turned the key in the ignition, the old truck roaring to life. The hospital was about 15 minutes away. He pressed the gas pedal, the road stretching before him like an endless tunnel of rain and uncertainty. His grip tightened on the wheel as he stole another glance at the unconscious woman beside him. Who was she, and why did he get the feeling that this night would change everything? The world came back to Isabel in slow, disjointed pieces. First the steady, rhythmic beeping of a monitor, then the distant hum of voices muffled behind closed doors. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled her lungs as she took a shallow breath, wincing as a dull ache pulsed in her temple. She opened her eyes, blinking against the harsh white light overhead. Where am I? She tried to sit up, but a sharp sting at the side of her forehead made her inhale sharply. When she lifted a hand to touch it, her fingers met a bandage. Then memories began to surface. The storm, the road slick with rain, the way her car spun out of control, the sudden impact. Her heart pounded as panic surged through her. Had anyone else been hurt? She turned her head quickly, eyes darting around the hospital room. It was a standard private suite. Beige walls, a tray of untouched food on the bedside. Table, a bouquet of white lilies resting in a glass vase. She didn't recognize them. Then her gaze landed on the jacket draped over her. It was too big for her, made of leather, worn at the seams. The faint scent of motor oil and rain clung to it. It didn't belong to her. She frowned, her fingers tightening around the collar, as if holding on to something tangible might help ground her disoriented mind. Then she noticed the man sitting in the chair beside her bed. The stranger who saved her was leaning back, arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting but wasn't particularly in a hurry. His clothes, dark jeans and a simple button-up, were slightly damp, likely from the rain outside. His hair, a deep brown, was tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it more times than he cared to count. But it was his eyes that struck. Her first, an intense shade of blue, steady and unreadable. She opened her mouth, but no words came. "You're awake," he said simply. His voice was deep, steady, with no trace of concern or expectation. She swallowed, her throat dry. "What happened?" "You crashed your car, lost control in the storm." Her fingers instinctively clutched the bedsheet. She had already guessed that much. "And you?" "I pulled you out before the car exploded," he said, as if stating something entirely unremarkable. Isabel's breath hitched. She had been seconds away from death, and this man had been the one to save her. She searched his face, expecting some hint of self-importance, some indication that he was waiting for her to shower him with gratitude, but there was none. He just sat there unmoved, as if what he had done was nothing worth mentioning. A flicker of something unfamiliar passed through her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice still hoarse. "Liam Carter." The name meant nothing to her, but something about the way he said it, as if it was just a name and not a title, felt oddly grounding. She licked her lips, voice still weak. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." "Just Liam," he corrected, standing up as if his job here was done. "And don't worry about it. A woman used to expectations. Don't worry about it." Isabel was used to people always expecting something from her. Money, connections, influence, gratitude. Men who helped her always had an agenda, always wanted something in return. A favor, an investment, a spot on an exclusive guest list. But this man, this Liam Carter, just saved her life and didn't seem to care who she was. Did he even know? "Wait," she said, her voice stronger now. "I want to repay you." Liam exhaled, through his nose, as if he had already expected that. He turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "You don't need to." Isabel frowned. "I insist. You don't owe me anything," he interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. "I didn't do it for a reward." The words landed with an unexpected weight. She had been prepared for negotiations, for the usual back and forth, where she would have to convince someone that her gratitude had monetary value. But he just didn't want anything. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. "You saved my life," she said finally. He shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. The man who walked away. Liam glanced at the clock on the hospital wall. "You'll be fine. The doctor said you just need rest." He took one step back toward the door. It was then that Isabel realized he was actually leaving. He wasn't staying for gratitude, for compensation, or for any recognition. He had done what needed to be done, and now he was walking away like none of it mattered. She didn't understand why that bothered her so much. He hesitated briefly, eyes flicking toward his leather jacket still draped over her lap. He gave her a small nod. "Keep it," he said. "You were freezing." And just like that, he turned and walked out. Isabel sat there, staring at the empty doorway, her hands gripping the jacket of the man who wanted nothing from her. And for the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't quite name. The accident had been 2 weeks ago, but Isabel Harrington still couldn't get it out of her mind. More specifically, she couldn't stop thinking about him, Liam Carter, the man who had saved her life, and walked away without a second thought. She had expected the memory to fade. After all, she had faced crises before, endured far worse situations in her life. But for some reason, this one lingered. She would find herself absently running her fingers over the worn leather jacket he had left her, still hanging in the corner of her penthouse. She would replay their brief conversation in the hospital, his indifferent tone, his complete lack of interest in her wealth or status. It was absurd. Men always wanted something from her, but not him. And for the first time in years, Isabel found herself wanting to understand why. A search for the unforgettable stranger. It hadn't been hard to find him. With just a few discreet inquiries, she had learned that Liam Carter was a mechanic, working in a small-town garage about an hour outside the city. It was the kind of place she had never set foot in before, a world so different from her own. So why was she driving there now? Dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, she had left behind the tailored suits and designer heels that usually defined her. Today, she wasn't Isabel Harrington, billionaire CEO. She was just a woman who wanted to see the man who had saved her life. Her sleek black sedan stood out in the dusty parking lot of Carter's Auto Repair, surrounded by old trucks and work vans. The smell of motor oil and gasoline lingered in the crisp air as she stepped out. She hesitated briefly. What was she even going to say? But before she could second-guess herself, the garage door rolled open with a heavy clang, and there he was, Liam's. Reaction Liam Carter stood just inside the open bay, wiping grease off his hands with an old rag. The midday sun cast sharp lines across his face, highlighting his strong jaw and the streaks of oil on his forearms. At first, he barely glanced her way. Then his gaze settled on her, and she saw the exact moment recognition dawned in his eyes. Isabel had expected shock, maybe even annoyance, but all she got was a slow, unreadable stare before he said, "What are you doing here?" She blinked. That was it. No greeting, no curiosity. Straight to the point. Her lips pressed together before she answered, "I came to thank you." Liam tossed the rag onto a nearby workbench. "You already did." Not properly. At that, he let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh and crossed his arms. "Look, you don't owe me anything." Isabel's jaw tightened. This was not how people usually responded to her. She had spent her life surrounded by people who bent over backwards to accommodate her. Even when she wasn't looking for gratitude, she received it in excess, forced. Smiles, overly enthusiastic thank yous, and the ever-present expectation of something in return. But Liam Carter. He looked at her as if she was just another person who had wandered into his garage, disrupting his work. It was both infuriating and fascinating. "Fine," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "If you won't let me thank you, at least let me buy you a coffee." Liam raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "I don't need coffee." Isabel huffed out a breath. What kind of man turns down free coffee? Liam smirked faintly, as if amused by her persistence. But still, he shook his head. One who doesn't need to be repaid for doing the right thing. There it was again, that firm, unwavering moral stance, and instead of making her want to walk away, it made her want to push back harder. An offer. He couldn't refuse. She should have left. She should have said thank you one last time. Gotten back into her car and driven away. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself standing her ground, arms crossed, studying him with narrowed eyes. "You know," she mused, tilting her head slightly, "I get the feeling that you don't like people very much." Liam let out a dry chuckle. "I like people just fine. I just don't like wasting my time." "Then let's not waste any more," she countered smoothly. "One coffee. That's it." Liam exhaled slowly, as if debating whether or not it was worth arguing. Finally, he muttered, "Fine, but you're buying." A small, victorious smile touched Isabel's lips. "Of course," she said lightly. "That was the whole point." The unexpected reunion begins. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as they walked toward the small diner across the street from the garage. Liam still looked mildly annoyed at having agreed to this, but Isabel noticed something else, too, a flicker of curiosity in his otherwise guarded gaze. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to wonder about her, too. And for the first time since the accident, Isabel felt something unfamiliar but oddly welcome, a quiet anticipation for whatever came next. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the small cafe, mingling with the sound of rain pattering against the large glass windows. The world outside was drenched in a steady downpour, the streets slick with water, headlights casting long, shimmering reflections. Inside, the space was cozy, wooden tables, dim lighting, the occasional clatter of dishes from behind the counter. It was the kind of place where people lingered, wrapped in the quiet hum of conversation and the comfort of a hot drink on a cold day. Isabel hadn't stepped foot in a cafe like this in years. And yet, here she was, sitting across from Liam Carter, the man who had saved her life and then walked away as if it had meant nothing, a world outside of her own. She curled her hands around the ceramic mug in front of her, the warmth seeping into her fingers. Across from her, Liam sat unbothered, as if their encounter, her showing up at his garage, insisting on this coffee, was just another minor detour in his day. He wasn't impatient. He wasn't annoyed, but he also wasn't eager. He was simply there, drinking his black coffee, his posture relaxed but closed off, as if he was waiting for her to say whatever she had to say and be done with it. It unsettled her more than it should have. "So," she began, breaking the silence, "do you always refuse gratitude, or is it just me?" Liam didn't even blink. "I told you, you don't owe me anything." She exhaled slowly, watching the steam rise from her cup. "That's not how things usually work." "That's how I work," he said, unfazed. She studied him. His face was rough around the edges. His hands still carried faint traces of grease. But his eyes were sharp and piercing, as if he could see straight through people and didn't always like what he found. Liam Carter was not like the men she knew. And the more he dismissed her, the more intrigued she became, a man who expected nothing. The rain outside grew heavier, the soft tapping against the window turning into a steady rhythm. Isabel took a sip of her coffee, letting the moment stretch between them before finally asking, "Do you have a family?" It was meant to be a casual question, small talk, but she noticed the way Liam's grip on his cup tightened just slightly. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "My daughter, Emma." Isabel blinked. She hadn't expected that. "You have a daughter?" Liam gave a small nod, swirling the liquid in his mug. "She's 10, smart kid, a little too stubborn for her own good, but she's my world." Something about the way he said it, the quiet certainty, the way his voice softened just slightly, made something in Isabel's chest tighten. Liam Carter wasn't just a man who fixed cars. He was a father raising a little girl on his own. She leaned forward slightly. "What about her mother?" He hesitated, then exhaled through his nose. "She left when Emma was a baby. Didn't want the responsibility." Isabel's fingers unconsciously tightened around her cup. She had spent her entire life watching people walk away, from friendships, from relationships, from her. She knew what that kind of abandonment did to a person. Liam didn't look like the kind of man who talked about himself often. And yet, here he was, sharing a sliver of his life with her. She didn't know why, but it meant something. Two strangers, one conversation. For the first time in a long time, Isabel found herself genuinely wanting to know more about someone else's life, not for business, not for strategy, but simply because Liam Carter was different. "Raising a child alone," she murmured. "That can't be easy." Liam lifted a shoulder in a small shrug. "It's not. But you figure it out. You make it work." Something about the simplicity of his words struck her. There was no bitterness in his tone, no resentment, just acceptance. The conversation shifted, softened. Liam, slowly and cautiously, began to talk more, not about himself, but about Emma. He told Isabel about the time she tried to fix a bicycle on her own and ended up with a handful of extra screws and no idea where they came from. Or the time she insisted on making him breakfast for Father's Day and almost set the kitchen on fire. As he spoke, Isabel watched something in him change. The quiet, reserved mechanic who had seemed so indifferent before was now a man who loved his daughter fiercely, who had built his life around making sure she had everything she needed. And Isabel, who had spent her entire life surrounded by people who only cared about money, power, and influence, found herself listening more intently than she had in years. An unexpected shift. She had come here to thank him, but now, as she sat across from him in a small cafe on a rainy afternoon, she realized she had found something she hadn't even been looking for, a conversation that wasn't transactional, a connection that wasn't built on expectations or obligations. Just two people talking, learning about each other in a way that felt strangely natural. She placed her cup down, tilting her head. "You know, you're not what I expected." Liam raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. "But I do know that most people would have tried to use my accident to their advantage." Liam exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, I'm not most people." Isabel smiled, a real smile, not the polished kind she gave in business meetings. "No," she said, "you're not." The rain outside pounded harder. But inside the cafe it was warm, comfortable, and for the first time in a long, long time, Isabel didn't feel alone. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean, but still heavy with the scent of damp earth and asphalt. The streets glistened under the dim glow of streetlights, the occasional ripple forming in puddles as a breeze stirred. The quiet night. Liam and Isabel walked side by side down the nearly deserted sidewalk, their steps unhurried. The cafe, where they had shared coffee, was now just a warm memory, but neither of them seemed eager to end the night just yet. For the first time since the accident, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else. Something neither of them quite understood yet. A past she had buried. Isabel adjusted the lapels of her coat, pulling it tighter around her as if trying to shield herself from something colder than the night air. She wasn't sure why she was still walking beside Liam, why she hadn't simply thanked him one last time and returned to the world she knew. But something about his calm, unwavering presence kept her here. And before she could stop herself, she heard her own voice breaking the silence. "I was married once." The words felt foreign on her tongue, as if she were admitting something she had long tried to forget. She wasn't even sure why she had said it. Perhaps because Liam had spoken so openly about Emma, or maybe because, for the first time in years, she felt like someone might actually listen. Liam didn't react right away. He kept walking, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his eyes focused ahead. But she knew he had heard her. After a few moments, he finally asked, "What happened?" Isabel exhaled softly. She had never been good at talking about this. But if there was ever a time to try, it was now. "My ex-husband Daniel was the kind of man everyone admired," she began, her voice carefully measured. "Smart, charismatic, successful." She let out a bitter laugh. "But he was also the kind of man who only valued people for what they could give him." Liam didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "He never hurt me physically," she continued, as if that somehow made it less painful. "But he controlled everything, the way I spoke, the way I dressed, who I could talk to, where I could go. And for the longest time, I let him." She hated how raw the words sounded. She hadn't spoken about this in so long that she had almost convinced herself it wasn't worth remembering. But standing here now, with Liam beside her, she realized she had never really let go of it. "I stayed because I thought I had to," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I thought love was supposed to feel like that, like something that took and took until there was nothing left of you." She didn't realize she had stopped walking until she felt Liam's gaze on her. A truth she had never heard before. When she finally met his eyes, she expected to see pity, the same look people always gave her when they learned about her past. But there was none of that. Just quiet understanding. "He never deserved you." The words were simple, blunt, and yet they hit harder than anything she had ever heard. For years, she had told herself she had been foolish to stay, weak, a woman who should have known better. But Liam's words were different. They shifted the blame off her shoulders, put it where it actually belonged. She let out a shaky breath, suddenly realizing that she had been gripping the edge of her coat too tightly. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she admitted. "I haven't talked about it in years." Liam shrugged slightly, his gaze steady. "Maybe you needed to." She had no answer to that. Maybe he was right. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, she had needed someone to listen without judgment. A shared understanding of loss. They resumed walking, the quiet night stretching between them once more. Isabel expected Liam to change the subject, to brush past what she had just shared, but instead, after a long moment, he spoke. "I get it," he said. She turned to him, surprised. "You do?" Liam nodded. "People assume pain has to be something. You can see bruises, scars, but sometimes it's the invisible kind that leaves the deepest marks." His words settled into her chest like a truth she had always known, but never admitted. For the first time, she saw Liam not just as the man who had saved her life, but as someone who understood pain in his own way. He hadn't asked for her past, and he didn't try to fix it. He simply listened, and somehow that meant more than anything else. The first signs of change as they neared her car, Isabel felt something shift, not just between them, but inside her. For years, she had carried her past like a weight she couldn't put down. But tonight, in the stillness of the post-rain evening, it felt lighter. She didn't know what this was, this quiet understanding that had formed between her and Liam, but she knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, she had spoken about her past without feeling weak. And it was because, with Liam, it didn't feel like a burden. She turned to him, opening her mouth to say something, thank you, maybe, or something equally inadequate. But Liam just gave her a small nod, as if he already understood. "Get home safe," he said simply. And then just like that, he walked away. The days that followed their conversation felt different, though neither Isabel nor Liam acknowledged it aloud. Something had shifted that night, subtle, unspoken, but undeniable. Isabel found herself thinking about Liam more often than she cared to admit. His words lingered in her mind at odd moments, the way he had listened without judgment, the way he had said, "He never deserved you." She wasn't sure why it mattered so much, but it did. The quiet return. The first time she returned to his garage, she had told herself it was just coincidence. The second time, she had brought him coffee. By the third time, she stopped making excuses. Liam never asked why she was there. He didn't question her presence, didn't give her the wary glances she was used to receiving from people who thought they knew her. He simply let her be. She would sit in the corner of the shop, quietly watching as he worked, his movements steady and deliberate. There was something about the way he carried himself, solid, dependable, completely at ease in his own world, that made it easier to breathe around him. For once, she wasn't the billionaire, the public figure, the woman who had to be perfect at all times. She was just Isabel, and somehow that was enough, a rainfall that changed everything one evening. She stopped by the garage later than usual. The sun had long since set, the streetlights casting pools of soft yellow against the damp pavement. Liam was still inside, finishing up work on a rusted old truck. She didn't mind waiting. As she stepped outside, a light rain began to fall. Not heavy, just a soft drizzle, cool against her skin. But instead of moving towards shelter, she stood still, tilting her head up to the sky. She closed her eyes. There was something strangely freeing about it, the sensation of rain on her face. In another life, she wouldn't have let herself do something so simple. But tonight, she didn't care. Liam sees her for the first time. Liam stepped outside a few minutes. Later, wiping his hands with an old rag, he expected to see Isabel waiting by her car, impatient as ever. But instead, she was standing in the rain, her face turned upward, eyes closed, as if she were absorbing the moment. For the first time, he really looked at her, not as the woman whose life he had saved, Not as the billionaire who didn't belong in his world, just her. She was breathtaking in a way he hadn't noticed before, not because of her wealth or status, but because in this moment she was completely unguarded. And, for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, the shift between them. He didn't speak. Instead, he simply walked toward her, holding out his jacket like he had the night of the accident. She opened her eyes, blinking at him through the rain. But this time, she didn't reach for the jacket. Instead, she reached for his hand. It was barely a touch, just her fingertips brushing against his palm. But it was enough. Liam didn't move away. For a moment, they just stood there, neither speaking, neither needing to. The world around them was silent, save for the steady rhythm of the rain. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic realization, just something unnamed, something neither of them was ready to admit, but both of them felt. A moment. Neither would. Forget. Finally, Isabel let go first, stepping back as if suddenly realizing what she had done. Liam didn't say anything. He just watched her for a moment longer before silently draping his jacket over her shoulders. She didn't argue this time, and, as they walked back toward the garage together, neither of them spoke, but they both knew something had changed. The moment in the rain had changed everything, and yet neither of them acknowledged it. In the days that followed, something unspoken lingered between them. Isabel continued visiting Liam's garage just as she had before. She would bring coffee, sit on the edge of his workbench, watch as he tinkered with engines and wiped the grease from his hands. On the surface, nothing had changed, but they both felt it. The shift, the awareness, the quiet tension curling between them like a slow-burning fuse. It was in the way Liam avoided looking at her for too long. The way his fingers sometimes hesitated when she handed him a tool. The way Isabel found herself studying him more than she should, noticing things she hadn't before. The way his jaw clenched when he was deep in thought, the quiet strength in his movements, the steadiness that made her feel safe. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew that whatever was happening between them was no longer just friendship, and Liam knew it too. The distance. He creates Liam didn't do attachments. He had spent years learning to be self-sufficient, keeping his world small, protecting himself from things that couldn't last. People left, promises broke, love faded, and Isabel. She was everything he had sworn he would never let himself want. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong in his garage, drinking bad coffee and watching him work as if this was her life too. She didn't belong in his world of oil-stained hands and long nights spent balancing bills and making sure Emma had everything she needed. And yet, she kept coming back, and he let her until he couldn't anymore. So he began pulling away. His answers became shorter, his gaze cooler. He stopped offering her his jacket when it was cold, stopped letting their hands linger when they passed each other tools. It was subtle, but Isabel noticed. At first she didn't understand, but then she did. And it made her furious, a confrontation that couldn't be avoided. The tension had been building for days, and tonight it finally snapped. Liam had just finished closing up the shop when Isabel appeared at the garage door, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. He exhaled slowly, already bracing himself. "You're avoiding me," she said, voice even, but carrying an edge beneath it. Liam didn't deny it. Instead, he tossed the wrench he had been holding onto the workbench, wiped his hands on a rag, and met her gaze with carefully measured indifference. "I've been busy." "Bullshit," she shot back, stepping closer. "You're pulling away." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a split second he hated how well she could see through him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Isabel, in this, whatever this is, it's not a good idea." She narrowed her eyes. "And why is that?" "Because we don't make sense," he said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. She let out a sharp breath. her frustration finally breaking free. "Who says we don't make sense? You?" "Yeah," he admitted, voice quiet but firm. "Me." She stared at him, hurt flashing across her face for the briefest moment before she masked it with anger. "You know," she said, voice laced with something dangerously close to disappointment, "for someone who doesn't care about money or status, you sure love using it as an excuse to push people away." Liam's jaw tensed. "It's not an excuse, Isabel. It's reality." She took another step forward, her voice softer now but no less intense. "And what if reality doesn't matter?" Liam didn't have an answer for that, because if he admitted that reality didn't matter, then he would have to admit that she did, and he couldn't afford that. So instead, he said nothing. And after a long, heavy silence, Isabel did something she had never done before. She walked away first. The weight of unspoken words. Liam stood there long after she was gone, his hands clenched into fists, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? Then, why did it feel like he had just made a mistake he wouldn't be able to take back? The days following Isabel's departure were quiet. Too quiet. Liam had told himself he needed space, that putting distance between them had been the right thing to do. But now that the space was there, it felt like something was missing. He had spent the last few days throwing himself into work, keeping his head down, telling himself that if he kept busy, he wouldn't think about her. Wouldn't think about the way she had stood in the rain, completely unguarded. Wouldn't think about the hurt in her eyes when he had told her they didn't make sense. Wouldn't think about how wrong it had felt watching her walk away. And for a while, it almost worked. Until the phone call that changed everything. The call that stopped everything. It was late afternoon when his phone rang. Liam wiped the grease off his hands before reaching for it, barely glancing at the screen before answering. "Carter. Mr. Carter, this is Mrs. Reynolds from Lincoln Elementary." His stomach instantly tightened. Emma's teacher. Something was wrong. "There's been an accident." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Every thought in his head went blank. She was out on the playground and she fell, pretty badly. Liam's breath came sharp and uneven. His fingers clenched around the phone. How bad? She hit her head and there was a lot of blood. The paramedics decided to take her to the hospital just to be safe. Liam didn't hear the rest of what she said. All he knew was that his daughter was hurt and he wasn't there. "I'm on my way," he said hoarsely, before hanging up and bolting toward his truck. A familiar face at the hospital. Liam had driven fast before, but never like this. The hospital parking lot blurred as he pulled in, barely remembering to kill the engine before jumping out. His heart was pounding, his hands unsteady, as he stormed through the entrance, searching desperately for someone who could tell him where she was. "Mr. Carter." A nurse stepped forward. "Your daughter is—" "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice rough with barely controlled panic. "She's stable, but the doctor is still checking her." Before the nurse could finish, Liam's eyes landed on someone unexpected standing down the hall. Isabel. She was already there. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable, but the moment she saw him, her eyes softened, and something inside him cracked. The moment he couldn't push her away. "She's okay," Isabel said quietly. Liam stared at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "How do you know that?" "I was here when they brought her in," she admitted. "I was nearby and I saw the ambulance. I followed." He should have been surprised, but he wasn't, because of course she had come, because even after everything, she was still here. Liam swallowed hard. "I can't," he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I can't lose her." Isabel stepped closer, hesitation in her eyes, but she didn't touch him. "Not yet. You won't." His throat felt tight. his entire body locked up with a fear he couldn't shake. And then, for the first time since she had walked into his life, Liam let himself need her. He didn't say anything. He just reached for her hand. And this time, she didn't let go. The weight of unspoken words. They sat together outside Emma's hospital room, side by side. Isabel didn't ask him questions. She didn't try to fill the silence. She just stayed. And for the first time, Liam realized, maybe, that was what he had been afraid of all along. Not losing her, but needing her, and knowing he wouldn't be able to let go. The hospital was quiet in the early hours of the morning. The harsh fluorescent lights had dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of machines and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Outside, the night stretched on, the city sleeping under the weight of fading rain. Inside Emma's hospital room, Liam sat unmoving beside her bed, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes trained on his daughter's peaceful face. She would be okay, the doctors had assured him. The concussion wasn't severe, and the stitches on her forehead would heal. By tomorrow, she'd likely be sitting up, smiling at him as if nothing had happened. But Liam wasn't okay. The fear from earlier still lingered in his chest, tightening with every breath. He had nearly lost her. And the worst part, he had been alone when it happened. Or at least he thought he had been. But then there was Isabel. Still here she stayed. He hadn't noticed her at first, hadn't realized that she hadn't left his side since the moment he arrived at the hospital. She was sitting now, curled up in the chair by the window, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched him with quiet patience. Liam exhaled heavily, running a hand over his face. "You didn't have to stay." Isabel's gaze didn't waver. "I know." The words hung between them, simple but filled with meaning. For a long time, neither of them spoke, and yet the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was different. It was the kind of silence that came from understanding, the kind that neither of them had ever really known before. Man who never let anyone in, Liam leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His voice was quieter when he finally spoke. "I don't let people in." Isabel remained still, but he could feel her listening. "It's easier that way," he continued, almost to himself. "People leave, or they disappoint you, or they take what they need and move on." His jaw tensed. "So I learned to stop expecting anything from anyone." He let out a slow breath. "And then you showed up." Isabel's expression softened, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that scared you?" He didn't answer at first, because yes, it had. She had. The way she challenged him, the way she saw him, the way she kept showing up even when he pushed her away. Liam wasn't used to people staying, and yet here she was, still here, a woman who had only been seen for her wealth for a long moment. Isabel didn't speak. Then, just as he had done, she let her guard down. "I know what it's like," she admitted softly. Liam turned his head toward her, his gaze searching. "To be afraid." "To be alone," she corrected, her fingers curled into the fabric of her sweater. "People look at me and see what they want to see, my name, my money, my family's legacy, but no one sees me." Her voice faltered, just for a second. "And the truth is, I don't know how to be wanted, just for me." The confession sat between them, heavy and unguarded. Liam had never thought about it like that before. He had spent so much time keeping people at a distance, assuming the worst, preparing for people to leave. But Isabel had spent her life trapped in a different kind of loneliness, one where people never really knew her at all. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of her words settle in. "You deserve to be seen," he said finally. Isabel let out a breath, something unreadable flashing in her eyes. "So do you." A shift. Between them, for the first time since they had met, there was no hesitation in the way they looked at each other, no pretenses, No walls, just understanding. Liam reached for her hand, not out of desperation this time, not because he needed her to stay, but because he wanted to. And Isabel didn't pull away. She held on, her fingers threading through his, in a way that felt effortless, natural. Right, they didn't speak again, they didn't need to, because for the first time, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of something neither of them was ready to name. But maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to. Not yet. The days that followed Emma's accident were quieter than Isabel expected. She and Liam fell into something that felt natural, almost too easy, an unspoken rhythm that neither of them questioned. She still came by the garage, watching him work, sometimes handing him tools, sometimes saying nothing at all. Liam never told her to leave, and Isabel never did. There was no label, no grand conversation about what they were to each other, but she knew they were something, and that was enough. Until it wasn't. A call from another world. The call came in the middle of the afternoon. Isabel had just set down a cup of coffee on Liam's workbench when her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it, but something in her gut told her she shouldn't. When she saw the name on the screen, she sighed. Her assistant. She answered, barely getting a word in before a frantic voice filled her ear. Ms. Harrington, we have a problem. And just like that, her world shifted. A corporate deal, one that had taken months to negotiate, was suddenly falling apart. Investors were pulling back. The board was expecting her in New York by the end of the week. Liam watched as she listened, his hands tightening around the wrench in his grip. When she hung up, she didn't say anything right away, neither did he. Because they both knew. The choice she didn't want to make that night. They met at the diner. It was a small place, tucked into the edge of town, a spot that Isabel had never noticed before Liam. But now, it felt like theirs. They sat across from each other in a booth, the warmth of the cafe contrasting with the cold reality pressing between them. You're leaving. Liam said it first. Isabel inhaled slowly. I have to. Liam nodded, staring down at his coffee. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. So Isabel did. What if I stayed? His head snapped up, eyes locking onto hers. What? If I stayed, she repeated. What happens next? Liam exhaled sharply, leaning back against the booth. He ran a hand through his hair, looking away. Isabel, I'm serious. He let out a slow breath. I don't know. The words shouldn't have hurt, but they did, because that was the difference between them. She was willing to risk everything. And Liam, he was still too afraid to try. A goodbye that wasn't really a goodbye. By the time they left the diner, it had started to rain, a perfect, cruel symmetry. They stood outside, neither of them moving, the sound of raindrops filling the silence. Liam stuffed his hands into his pockets. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning. A muscle in his jaw twitched, but he didn't say anything, and that hurt more than she expected. She took a step, closer. Liam! He lifted his head, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought, hoped, he would say something that would make her stay, but he didn't. So she forced a small smile. Take care of yourself. He nodded, but the look in his eyes said everything his words didn't, and then, just like that, she turned and walked away. The moment in the rain comes full circle. Liam stood there long after she was gone. The rain soaked through his jacket, his boots heavy against the pavement. The night they met, he had saved her from the wreckage of her car. Tonight, he was letting her go. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he had made the right choice. Because as he watched the taillights of her car disappear into the distance, one thought echoed in his mind. This wasn't really the end. Not yet. Not for them. The winter had passed. Spring crept in slowly, stretching its fingers across the small town, warming the streets where rain had once poured. The trees were beginning to bloom again, filling the air with something new, yet strangely familiar, a quiet reminder that time moved forward, even when people weren't ready for it. Liam Carter had settled back into his routine. The garage was as busy as ever. Emma was healthy, happy, and back to her usual self, filling their home with laughter, stories, and the kind of resilience only children possessed. On the surface, everything was the same, but Liam knew better, because every now and then, in the quiet moments, he felt it, the absence of something he had never truly let himself hold on to, or rather, someone. What's left behind? He noticed it in the smallest of ways. At the diner, when he reached for the extra cup of coffee, before realizing she wasn't there to take it. At the garage, when he glanced toward the chair she used to sit in, waiting with that quiet, knowing look in her eyes, as if she could see straight through him, in the silence of his truck, where the radio played songs he barely listened to anymore, because they reminded him of nights spent talking to someone who never asked for more than what he was willing to give. She was gone, and yet she wasn't. Because some people leave marks on your life that time can't erase. And Isabel Harrington, she had left an unforgettable one. A letter without a return address. It was late one evening when he found it. Liam had just finished locking up the garage, the scent of motor oil still clinging to his hands, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He had turned to leave when something on the floor caught his eye. An envelope slipped under the door. His name was written across it in familiar, delicate script. He didn't have to open it to know who it was from, but he did anyway. The words that changed everything. The letter wasn't long, it wasn't pleading, it wasn't filled with regrets or accusations, it was just the truth. Liam, some people leave because they want to. Others leave because they think they have to. I wonder which one you were. I don't know if you ever thought about coming after me. I don't know if you ever stood in the rain again, wondering if you should have said something different that night. But if you did, then maybe, just maybe, our story isn't really over. You don't have to answer this letter. You don't owe me anything. But if you ever find yourself looking for me, you know where to start. Isabel. Liam read it once, then again, then one more time. And with each word, something in his chest tightened and cracked all at once. She hadn't asked him to follow her, hadn't begged him to change his mind. She had simply left the door open, and now, for the first time, the choice was his to make. A final choice, left unspoken. Liam stood in the garage for a long time, the letter in his hands, his heart beating louder than the silence around him. The world outside was dark, the streets quiet, the sky heavy with the promise of another rain. He thought about the night they met, the storm, the wreck, the moment. His life had changed without him realizing it, and now here he was again, standing at another crossroads. Only this time there was no accident forcing his hand, only a question. Would he let her be another thing he lost, or would he finally go after something before it was too late? An ending that isn't really an ending. Liam let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the letter, and then he moved, not toward the door, not toward his truck, not toward any immediate decision, just forward, because some choices aren't made in a single moment. Some choices take time, but one thing was certain, this wasn't really the end, not for them, not yet. Stories have a way of connecting us, no matter where we are in the world. So, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to know if this story has touched you, if you've ever felt the weight of unspoken emotions or wondered about the choices left unmade, then this is just the beginning. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Like and share. If this story resonated with you, your support means everything. It's what keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being here, for watching, for feeling every moment with us. Until next time, stay inspired.